Coming up next on This Week in Computer Hardware, Kepler goes mobile and beats the Samaritan demo. Ultrabooks updated, 9 microamps of power, stop streaming video bottlenecks, M11X now, or wait for Ivy Bridge, and more NVIDIA GTX 680 hype. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 161, recorded March 15th, 2012. Nope, no 680 GTX news here. This episode of Twitch is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or television instantly. All streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, and this is the show where each and every week we bring you the best and most exciting news in, well, computer hardware. Big shock there. We also answer your questions after the break, and we got a special guest for you today. Ryan Shrout is off getting his March Madness on. He got apparently spectacular tickets for his favorite basketball team. So joining us today, PC Purr's Josh Walrath is stepping in today. Josh, how you doing, man?
I'm hanging in there. How are you doing?
I'm good. Did I come even close on the last name?
Josh Walrath. That's right there.
Oh, good, because I'm afraid I've been reading your name wrong for the last 6 months. You're in Laramie, Wyoming right now, where you are not under snow, I hear.
No, it's been a fantastic spring so far. Something that we haven't had in a long time. So yeah, it's been in the 50s and 60s here. It's kind of insane. Usually, I think it was last year about March 15th, we had negative 20-degree weather. So this has been a treat.
The coldest I've ever been in my life is in central Wyoming, and I got out of a car and I grabbed a gas pump handle, an aluminum gas pump handle, and my hand wasn't wet, but it still actually started freezing to the gas pump handle.
Sticking to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I peeled my hand off, and I get my big fleece and my jacket over my fleece and my super cool pseudo-Russian wool lamb helmet hat thing that was about 2 inches thick, and I go inside. There's this huge woman behind the counter, and I'm like, what's the temperature? And she looks at me, not a trace of irony in her voice. She's like, well, it's about negative 40 today. I mean, I don't know what the wind chill is, but it's about negative 40. But yesterday was really cold. I was just sitting there, and I'm like, gotta go, gotta get back to Colorado, gotta go.
Soon. Yeah.
I was like, negative 40 is not cold, but yesterday it was cold. I was scared. So yeah. What's got you excited at PC Purr this week? Any big stories coming up?
Well, I'm working on a video card review that is kind of nifty. It's a monster kind of video. It's not Kepler. Ryan's got a hold of those, I believe. But this is the MSI version of the HD 7970. It's their Lightning Edition. The thing is just, it's got like two big 10-centimeter fans on there. Maybe I shouldn't make such kind of hand signals, but it's a neat card, overclocked, way high out of the box. And we'll probably be hearing more about that here tomorrow. Maybe Ryan will talk about it a bit next week, but we'll see. But it's nice to see the next generation graphics, finally coming out. It's been a while since we've had, something really new and interesting. Been at least, 2.5 years since we had the HD 5870 that, kind of first broke the mold with DirectX 11. So
it's amazing how long it doesn't seem like they're spacing. It doesn't seem like they're managing to stretch out the life of the chipsets a little bit longer, the designs, the architecture, or is that just feel that way?
No, it is elongating, and it's just because the technology has moved so fast, and they've gotten to a point where they're simply just breaking a lot of the design software because they're dealing with parts that are 4 billion transistors in size. And the design tools have 3 years ago couldn't handle that kind of stuff. So, they're breaking new ground. And, if you kind of look back at when 3D graphics really first came out, 3DFX had their Voodoo graphics, and there were 2 chips involved, the texture and the render, the ROP, and each one of those chips were like 1 million transistors in size. So the total thing was 2 million, and now we're talking 4 billion. And yeah, you just can't keep up the pace that we saw as they were learning how to do everything. Mm-hmm. They were starting to take advantage of the newer process technologies that were coming out, and they just were very, very aggressive. They grew much faster in CPUs, and now we're at the point where you can't go any faster. You can design a 4 billion transistor chip and run it on the very latest process node, but until you can get to that next jump in process, you're just going to be stuck due to size and thermal limitations. So yeah, it's just going to be spread out wider and wider as the years go by.
I remember being really fascinated a few years ago, being in NVIDIA's headquarters and realizing that they were actually qualifying the new designs with these massive boxes that basically emulated all the transistors inside of a chip. They looked like oversized PC cases, and the idea of you would end up with a pile of transistors the size of a modest, actually probably a good sized house if you're trying to do a physical emulation of a modern GPU design. It'd just be really frightening. So NVIDIA GeForce GT 640M, Kepler's on mobiles. How is the new mobile part holding up?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story behind this one. As we know, Kepler has not been released yet. It's not officially been out. There's been no, they've had the editor's day. They've gotten hardware into guys' hands, but the NDAs for these have not expired. Well, Acer started selling these particular laptops with unreleased hardware in places in China, and this all came out, and many editors around our nation and around the world were a little unhappy with this because they were sitting on all the information, and NVIDIA just said, okay, fine, you guys can review this certain laptop that we've seeded out to all these different places, but you can't go into the technology too much. So we got the first review of a Kepler part before Kepler is released. And so this is the Acer Aspire Timeline Ultra M3. Now, this is a kind of an Ultrabook, but it's an Ultrabook with a 15.6-inch screen, and it doesn't quite fit the specifications of the Intel Ultrabook, but it still has an Intel Core i5-2467M, the Intel HD 3000 graphics, and, of course, the NVIDIA GT 640M, the first Kepler part, and that runs on their Optimus software, which switches back and forth between the integrated graphics and the external. Some things about this: it's the Kepler is 386 shader cores, or CUDA cores, as they like to say. It runs, I believe, around 400 megahertz with 800 megahertz shaders. They compared it against last generation GT 555M, as well as some of the other AMD mobile parts, and it comes out pretty good. It's a well-performing part. Again, we don't know all that much about a lot of the internal workings. It's a 128-bit memory bus. It's all around. The thing that they're really wanting to push with this is that it can play most modern games at high settings at a resolution of 13 by 7 or 1380 by 768. The results that Ryan and Matt got with this is that pretty much stands true. I mean, they have Deus Ex Revolution or Deus Ex Revolution, Battlefield 3, Batman Arkham City. All of these titles ran very, very well on this little 15.6-inch laptop that doesn't weigh a whole lot, and it's kind of an Ultrabook for somebody who doesn't like Ultrabooks. So yeah, it's a nice little product that NVIDIA is releasing, and with this generation, they're kind of stepping away from what they've previously done. If you think back of the G80, which powered the 8800 GTX, or with this last not Kepler, but Fermi generation, the GTX 480. I mean, these were huge chips at the time. They pulled a lot of power. They ran really hot, and that was something that NVIDIA was kind of known for. I mean, they were going to put out these first generation products. They're going to have the biggest of that generation product. It's going to pull a lot of power. It's going to be fast. And each one of these were, but the downside, of course, were heat and power consumption, and the price of these initial dies, because the first chips were huge because they were new. Usually they used cutting edge process nodes. Yields were horrific, and so the prices were higher than what we wanted to be. So there's a lot of negatives in that. Well, they've kind of turned that around. Now they're going for performance per watt. They're paying more attention to what some of the needs of the market are, and so this first generation of products, they're going to be smaller than we expected, and so that kind of gives them room to grow as the process matures, as their design methodology kind of tightens up with these new generation products, and so these parts are they're very good for mobile. This particular one, it doesn't get terribly hot. The design of the notebook itself is not that great, so the cooling is not fantastic. I think they measured something like 120 degrees Fahrenheit on the underside of the laptop. So if you've got that on your lap, you really need to strategically place it away from other sensitive areas. So
it's not the worst temperature I've heard on a notebook, but it's certainly not something you'd want.
It's up there. So have you read over any of this, or what are your thoughts on Kepler and what NVIDIA is doing now?
I'm just so shocked that it's, I'm a year ago, probably up until maybe 2 years ago, up until Alienware came out with the M11X. I've always been like, yeah, if you have a lot of money and you want to spend a lot of money in another 12 or 18 months, buy a gaming notebook, right? Because, the worst case scenario is the ones you see where it's essentially a desktop motherboard stuffed inside to a 17-inch notebook, and you've got like 14 minutes of battery life, but you get great gaming, except you can't update the graphics in the notebook. So it's kind of been fascinating over the last couple of years to watch notebook gaming get to the point where I don't feel like it's hurling money that you're going to be, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it's like, you can buy a gaming notebook and a desktop. Oh, no, wait, you can buy a notebook and a gaming desktop and spend less than the cost of a gaming notebook and be able to upgrade it, your gaming desktop for another 3 years. And, as I watch in this case, NVIDIA and Kepler and actually thinking about power for watt performance, it's nice. It's kind of it's a real change in paradigm for me, because I'm so used to thinking gaming notebooks, either too much money or horrendous performance. And it's nice to see something in the middle where it's like, hey, something that actually is fairly reasonably priced and will actually do really good on games. I think that's where I keep getting caught up. Just the idea is like, wow, gaming notebooks finally don't suck.
Yeah, I know. And we can kind of blame Intel and AMD for that as well, because Sandy Bridge has decent graphics. Ivy Bridge is finally going to get to a point where it sounds like they're going to be very close to the AMD Llano. Llano, of course, is really for an integrated graphics solution. It's fast. You can run it at higher resolutions, good quality levels. I mean, it doesn't look like integrated graphics, and it doesn't suck, which is absolutely fantastic for guys like you and I, because I agree with you. The whole idea of a 17-inch gaming laptop that you got to stand on stilts because it needs airflow to get under there so it won't melt the chassis. These things are just kind of ludicrous to me, because it just defeats the purpose of having a mobile platform, unless, of course, you're just a LAN gamer and you go to your friends' places and all these LAN events and you just want something to carry around with you. But I mean, that's such a niche market that it doesn't really make any sense. But yeah, it's great to see integrated graphics getting as good as they are. It's nice to see both AMD and NVIDIA releasing mobile parts that really do add to the value, but they don't necessarily add to the overall cost. So you get a much more robust gaming platform for something that's $700 to $800 versus you're buying $2,000 for some kind of gaming laptop.
It's also been interesting. It's funny. we're talking about Kepler on the mobile, but Kepler on the desktop has done some amazing things. Next story up on the list, Unreal Engine Samaritan demo running on a single NVIDIA Kepler GPU. So last year, Epic Unreal unleashed their Samaritan demo, which was, realistic hair, incredible cloth physics, lighting, shadows, anti-aliasing, basically everything you want for that incredibly enriching, oh my goodness, it looks like reality kind of gaming. And it was 3 SLI'd NVIDIA GTX 580s. So GDC last week, they were running the Samaritan demo on a single NVIDIA Kepler graphics card, quote, in real time, unquote. And it's always interesting when you see a demo because you never know, that may be the one Kepler card that can currently either overclock fast enough or run fast enough to do the demo. It could be, a 680 GTX, off the assembly line somewhere. So, you never really know what is being demoed unless they get really honest about it. But the interesting thing in there is, according to GeForce, it wasn't just the NVIDIA Kepler GPU that made this Samaritan demo on a single GPU possible, but the new anti-aliasing. Instead of traditional 4x multi-sample anti-aliasing, there's a really good shot of this up in the article, the fast approximate anti-aliasing. So
the FXAA.
Yeah. So the idea is it uses less memory. It does a fantastic job of anti-aliasing, and it's not going to bog down the chip as a result. So, the quote, the demo uses deferred shading to provide the complex, realistic lighting effects that would otherwise be impossible using forward rendering. So the downside, it says, to the arguably better lighting in the Samaritan demos that it requires 4 times as much memory.
Yeah. It's I watched this demo. It looks awesome, and the things we do need to remember is that we have had improvements not just in hardware but also in software. So it's coming out and saying, hey, this GTX 680 is 3 times the performance of a GTX 580. Well, that's not true, obviously. The use of the FXAA is a big chunk of that. Also, the GeForce 680 looks like it does a few things better than the GTX 580. Now we're going to look at a kind of generational jump in performance from what I hear, but it's not going to be a whole order of magnitude or anything like that. It's not going to be like a single GTX 680 is going to be faster than 2 GTX 580s. It's just not going to be the case. We're looking probably 20 to 40% at differing applications. So yeah,
there's a specs leak on the GTX 680.
Yeah,
that was posted. The screen grabber PC Online, where it's entirely in, I assume that's Japanese kanji and not Korean. But it's the biggest thing there. As you look at this, it's 1536 CUDA cores, 1006 megahertz, boost to 1058 megahertz, 2 gigs of GDDR5. It's the biggest thing you're looking at the 680, the CUDA cores, or is it the power consumption?
Yeah, well, we don't know the details of the CUDA cores, and what they have done with them. Have they made them smaller? Are they more simple? These are things that we simply do not know yet, and we won't know until later on this month. But a regular GTX 580 has 512 CUDA cores, and this has 3 times the amount. So it's kind of interesting to hear that Samaritan ran at 3 GTX 580s. Is that coincidence?
Okay, yeah, that's who knows. It's you definitely need the white cat to pet during that one, but it's
yeah.
I think people are let's say screw people. I'm excited to see the GTX 680 actually benchmarked, but at this point, it is Chinese characters. It's interesting to see what's going on. It's also interesting to think about the idea of that we're rapidly edging towards 2 gigabytes of RAM on a video card being normal, and that's an interesting thought, right? You look at the going from MSAA to the FXAA anti-aliasing, where the FXAA is sitting on 4 bits per pixel. You end up quadrupling the memory usage from 128 megabytes to 500 megabytes, and then all of a sudden, 2 gigabytes graphics cards could be a staple, and then we're going to be at 4 gigabytes, and then I'm going to be thinking I used to run Windows 7 on 4 gigabytes and not worry about it too much, and now my graphics card is stashing on that much memory. So.
Yeah, it's pretty astounding. I mean, think back of the old Voodoo 3. It had 16 megs of memory and could do 2D up to 1600 by 1200 resolution. 3D, it kind of bogged down, obviously, but yeah, 16 megs, and now we're looking at 2 gigs, and that's going to be pretty standard. The interesting thing is, always interesting things. They've got kind of a turbo core functionality where they raise up the clock speeds in areas that will require more performance, and they kind of do this just like the Intel CPUs and the AMD CPUs, except a little bit different in philosophy. So you've got only a couple of threads as compared to, say, 4 or 8. Those Intel and AMD chips will raise the clock speeds, so the single and dual threaded performance, are going to go a little bit faster. Well, in this, when you get some kind of really heavy duty benchmark or whatever, it's going to jump that clock up and kind of exceed its TDP for a short amount of time. So hopefully you can kind of get over that hump. And you have a little bit better performance and potentially a smoother ride through whatever gaming application that you've got going. So that's kind of neat that the GPU guys are starting to take some of these philosophies from the CPU guys more and more. And again, we're seeing a convergence of these technologies, obviously with AMD and their Llano and their upcoming Trinity, and Intel with their HD series of graphics. So NVIDIA is kind of that odd man out, but happily they have ARM to maybe prop it up.
That would be nice. It was interesting. I was also blown away because I've heard from a couple different sources, 2 6-pin power connectors, 195 watts maximum power consumption, but also everybody has told me that it's idling at 15 watts. So when you go down to like standard 2D computing, you're not going to hear every fan in your computer fire up as based on the amount of power that's being consumed by the 680. I'm just blown away also by the power requirements on these.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Oops, sorry.
Go right ahead. Yeah, for being 190 watts for a part as compared to even AMD's HD 7970, which requires a 6-pin and 8-pin, which I believe is 250 watt max. There's probably realistically a 30 watt difference between those two parts. And again, it looks like the GTX 680 is comparable at least, and in some things a little bit faster than the HD 7970. So again, NVIDIA is really pushing that performance per watt. And this is going to be a pretty hefty fist fight through the next of the year between these two companies and what they're going to be able to do. So I wonder if how much of it is going to just come down to software support and the ability to actually manufacture these chips, which both of them are having problems with right now.
Yeah, it's been one of the frustrations watching the last few rounds of topping GPU releases. Somewhat less frustrating, looking at the Ultrabooks, Asus is updating their ZenBook line with the UX31A and UX21A Ultrabooks. So if you haven't seen it, Asus actually has a really nice build quality. It's a really nice feel in the hand. And they are actually already, which is kind of early, refreshing or at least planning a refresh for them with upgraded hardware. So they will be replacing the UX21 and the UX31, same weight, same dimensions, and upping to Ivy Bridge processors, up to 4 gigs of low voltage DDR3 1600 memory, 512 gigabytes SATA drives, or I should say optional 512 gigabytes SATA SSDs. It would be nice if you could actually, I can't imagine a 512 gigabyte SATA SSD, or excuse me, a 512 gigabyte SSD not doubling the price of an Ultrabook.
That's
2 USB 3.0 ports, micro HDMI, SDXC card reader, and Bluetooth 4.0, which actually, the more I learn about Bluetooth 4.0, the more excited I get about it. The idea that you're going to be able to do not only, reduce power consumption on the devices and your notebook, but that they can actually do real-time data transmission and still have incredible battery life. So if you have, if you're running an iPad 3 with a heart monitor, an iPad, since it's not an iPad 3 and it's not a new iPad. Sorry, that naming is just kicking me in the teeth. But it's a really interesting idea that they're actually going to be able to use Bluetooth in real time without destroying battery life in a matter of minutes. I'm also still kind of amazed.
You were on here last week with Alan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least a couple weeks ago. So, did he show you off the stinking Asus Ultrabook that he snagged from Intel at CES?
No, he didn't.
I said, hey guys, let's go sit over here. I mean, it's a good place. And we all sat down and they're like, okay, look under your chairs. And Alan pulls out this Ultrabook. He's got it up in the air. Everybody else in the group was pretty pissed at him and wished that we were sitting in those chairs. But those are pretty sweet laptops. I think Intel actually did a nice job with the design on them and the specifications and working with their partners to actually get something, pretty decent out and pretty cost effective as compared to what Apple is doing with their MacBook Airs. So
that's true.
I'm excited to see.
I like a Core. I got to say that I work in a Mac shop, so I carry a MacBook Air, and I got to say, especially when somebody else is picking up the tab on a 256 gigabyte SSD. Not as good as finding one under your seat, though.
Your chair, no.
Another interesting story that came up. Did you catch the ARM Cortex Cortex-MO Plus?
That's it's something. It's a new design from ARM. ARM, of course, is just a design house. They license out their designs out to all these other guys. The other guys integrate it in their products, and then they fabricate them either through third parties or their own fabs. Like Samsung has their own fabs. Guys like NVIDIA and Qualcomm, I believe they use TSMC. And so this is just a very ultra low power, very basic processor. It does something like 9 microamps per megahertz. So, I mean, that's not milliamps, that's microamps. I mean, these things run at like 50 megahertz. You can do your basic, multiplication. They just sip power. It's a full 32-bit processor. It's not going to have the performance of, say, like an ARM, A9 Cortex or Cortex A9 or their Cortex A15 that's coming out here soon. But this is for things like it's going to be integrated into UPSs, the uninterruptible power supplies or sources. It calculates things like how much power is coming through the line. Do I see these ripples? Is this drop going? Do I need to switch over? These are the kind of logic pieces that will allow it to do that. Construction equipment, all kinds of other equipment that guys like you and I don't see except on the side of the road when they're working on stuff. And certainly we won't review, but what is kind of fascinating about this is not a 28 nanometer part. It's not even a 32 nanometer part or 45. It's way back there at 90 nanometers. It's an ultra cheap process that is well understood. If you think back of the last 90 nanometer CPUs, we're talking the original Athlon X2s. The Pentium 4, those were all 90 nanometer products for the most part. So, this is kind of neat tech, but it's it's interesting, but it's going to have very little to do with guys like you and I or enthusiasts. But again, it's neat to see these kind of designs coming out and just the proliferation of ARM devices throughout this world is amazing. Why ARM doesn't make more money than they do is kind of fascinating to me, because they've got products that, they get royalties and licenses coming in from everywhere. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see exactly what the licensing terms were and where ARM gets the money on the front side. Do they do it on the basic license so you get access to the designs? Do they get a VIG if the parts are particularly successful? I don't think I've seen anybody actually writing about how ARM makes it specifically in terms of the contracts. But I think few of the other companies ever release their license agreements. It's like, no, we're not going to talk about that one to you ever.
You also have to wonder, at 90 nanometers, if they could turn around and then as, the sort of like we think of 28 nanometer, 22 nanometer, these incredible die shrinks at the top of the sort of at the high end of the market. If that leaves all of these older machines being, either underutilized or considerably less expensive. And then you wonder, wow, if they're starting at 90 nanometers, if they do 1 or 2 die shrinks, what kind of performance? If you're pulling, 9 microamps at 90
Yeah.
nanometers. If you do a die shrink on that, are you going to drop another 20, 25% off the power consumption of the part?
You know,
What
the
a nice
main
little evolution
problem
that would be.
with that is die space for pads. So you've got this really uber small, die that
Right.
pulls hardly any power at all, but you can only, put 2 stinking wires or bonds to it because it's so tiny. That's why they had to use 90 nanometer, because they simply didn't have enough pad space to be able to mount that on some kind of substrate that can then integrate into whatever end user unit that you want to have. So we're not going to see these be shrunk anytime soon because there's simply not enough die space to be able to connect it to the world.
You could put I guess, it's an interesting thought. Like, there's no point in really shrinking the die. Well, you could shrink the design and then print it on a really big die, but then you end up spending a lot on empty silicon, which would be bad. Yeah. Oh, it's not bad, people. Netflix this week sorry. Excuse me. The tail end of the last of the winter toddler sickness is apparently trying to kill me one more time. Chaz, okay if I pick that up again?
Absolutely. I already have the time code written down for Tony to edit it out.
Sorry about that, Tony.
No
3,
problem.
2. It's pretty... wow, now I can't remember the line I picked in. 3, 2... We're going to come back in a moment with questions. Twitch, TWICH at twit.tv is our email address. We'd love to hear from you. That's how we feed the show, people. Right now, let's take a moment to thank our sponsor, Netflix. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Netflix. They stream thousands of TV episodes of movies to you instantly. It saves you time, money, and hassle. You don't have to go to the video store. You don't have to wait in line. You don't have to hang outside of the mall. Ladies and gentlemen, it is awesome. There's just an amazing array of ways. There's just so many ways you can instantly watch Netflix, your Mac, your PC, your iPad. I love the iPad app. And you know what? You can watch on your iPhone, some Android phones too. If you got a gaming console, Xbox 360, PS3, Nintendo Wii, you can watch Netflix right on your TV. Matter of fact, you can watch on your TV even if you're not a gamer with your Apple TV box, your Roku box. They're cheap. They're inexpensive. And there's a new 1080p one for Apple that came out this week, just started showing up. With Netflix, you can watch movies and TVs instantly using any of these devices. And one of the things I like, if I'm traveling or if I start watching a video at home, if I launch it up later on my iPad, let's say, it's time to go to sleep, but I want to finish watching that movie. I can leave the living room. I can walk into the other room with my iPad, and the movie or the television show picks up exactly where I left off. I can start on one device, finish on another one. And it doesn't really matter how you access Netflix. Any way you choose to access Netflix, you can watch as many movies and TV shows as you want, anytime you want, with no big surprise at the end of the month. There's one flat, low monthly fee. So if, let's say, the little person in your life watches 72 episodes of The Backyardigans, you're not going to get hit with 72 charges for it. You can cancel anytime. I can't imagine why you would. Really, though, we'd love you to try Netflix for 30 days for free. Go to netflix.com/twit. Do us a favor. Use netflix.com/twit when you sign up for your free trial. We want to thank Netflix for their support of Twitch, and we hope you enjoy watching instantly with Netflix.
Patrick, I almost started singing the Backyardigans song.
I'm so sorry.
We're your best friends. Yeah. Plus, also, what if I wasn't hanging out outside of the mall? Because I've got some serious mall hair going.
The one was like a friend of mine had this hysterical and probably not audience friendly story about when he went to go to a certain place to pick up a certain movie that's a certain 24-hour convenience store because he couldn't sleep and it was 4 a.m. And I'm like, dude, it's time to get Netflix, man. You're too old to be hitting the 7-Eleven to get a movie at 4 in the morning. You don't have to leave your house. I love it. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I forgot that you have a small creature at home. I would have never have queued up a children's show theme.
Two small children. So yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, we're about to have our second in about 3 weeks. So
good luck.
What's
going
to work? Teamwork. And I'm going to stop referencing themes.
I'm going to go get my backpack. Yeah.
We got an email from Paul about upgrades for SLI 570s. He says, love the show, guys. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Paul. I'm having some heat issues with my new PC build. I'm running an Intel 2600K, running at 4.4 gigahertz, a Z68 Mobo, 120 gigabyte SSD, 1.5 terabyte drive with SRT, 16 gigs of RAM, 2X GTX 470 and SLI, and an H60 water cooler. All of this is stuffed into an Antec P280 case. Oh, and PC power and cooling, 750 60 amp single rail power supply. Everything is great, but it's just so damn hot and loud. I was thinking of upgrading graphics cards to a new single card, but what would be my best bet? Basically, I am asking what is the best upgrade for my 2X GTX 470 SLI that will match the graphics power but consume less power and presumably generate less heat and require quieter fans.
Yeah.
Man.
You know, the thing that really catches my eye with that email is his power supply that he's running with, one, an overclocked CPU, and two GTX 470s, which are power-hungry, monstrous things. I had a test rig here that ran a Corsair 750-watt power supply that was very similar to this PC power and cooling and had a single rail design. And I put two GTX 480s on there. And I just had a standard clocked, I think it was, a Phenom 2 X6 1090T, which, is actually a pretty power efficient processor. I mean, it doesn't run that hot, even though it's 125 watt TDP official. I mean, it runs significantly lower than that in real life. And I was pegging that power supply. In fact, it was going over what it should be doing. So at the wall, it was pulling about 730 to 740 watts. And if you consider that the majority of your computer kind of runs on that 12-volt rail, and only a few things like hard drives use 5 volts, we're well over the spec of how many watts and how many amps that 12-volt rail could actually supply. And so what I started seeing happening was that the two GTX 480s that we're using were actually overheating because it just was not clean power. I don't know all the physics behind it, but they just kind of struggled with what was delivered to them, and they heated up. The power supply got pretty hot as well, and so that fan's just chugging. And this guy's got, something very, very similar. I mean, sure, GTX 470s are lower in power, but they're still way up there. And again, he's running, slightly overclocked processor. So something that he may consider is not just replacing the GTX 470s, but if he wants to in the future sometime, I mean, get another power supply, an 850 or 950 or 1,000 watt with a load like that. Try it out and see what happens. I mean, that could be a less expensive type purchase instead of getting, say, like a $500 graphics card that's not going to give you any more performance than two GTX 470s. So maybe consider, something like an 850 or 950 or 1,000 watt power supply, one of the higher end ones from either OCZ or Corsair or Antec, and try that at first and see if that doesn't solve some of your heat and power problems. Because if you're really overdriving that power supply, you're going to see kind of failures all the way down. And the way this comes out is a lot more heat on the video cards, a lot more heat with the power supply. And, it might be something to give a shot for, and it's a lot less expensive than new graphics cards. What do you think?
Well, since it seems to be my theme this month, the other option, is tempting, as you say, as it is to drop a whole bunch of money for a single graphics card that doesn't offer any more performance. I'm definitely on board. Upgrade the power supply, especially with one of the more, efficient power supplies available today. You also might want to consider whether or not you're willing to drop, and this could get expensive because water blocks for the NVIDIA GTX 470 are not cheap, but you could actually add water cooling onto your GPUs in addition to your CPU. It's not going to be as simple as the water cooling you're running on your CPU right now, the H60. But you might also consider, like, keeping the water block from the 860, putting on, getting a pump in there, putting water blocks on the GTX 470s, and, you could end up with a super quiet system that has incredible heat dissipation, as in, you'll barely know. You hear a little trickling of water in the background, and you won't really notice anything other than that. It's one of the things I like about seeing Kyle from Hard OCP. When you see the pictures of his office, there's 19 machines in there, and he's like, yeah, they're all water cooled. So I think he probably has the quietest office in computer testing. Not cheap, because I'm looking at some of the I'm looking up at performance-pcs.com, and I should probably check frozen CPUs, but you're looking at, in some cases, as much as $100 for a solid copper water block, which is not inexpensive, but there should be some less expensive options out there. And of course, the next line I click on is a $150 GTX 470 water block. So maybe $100 is the cheap way to go. But I do love water. When you're dealing with a lot of heat and a lot of air, I do love water cooling. Wow, another $150 water block. I'm just going to stop clicking on those links because apparently they are a little expensive. But yeah.
Well, they're shiny.
Yeah. Oddly enough, this one was painted matte. The second one was the first one was shiny. The second one was matte black. But the inexpensive one was actually pretty slick, because it had, actually, let me see if I can get the picture on there, machined copper with a plastic lid on it. So if you're into bling, that has a possibility for you. Get an email from Justin about building a streaming machine. He says, hey, Twitch crew, love to listen to the show, even though it's over my head sometimes. I know the feeling. I am getting ready to build a PC for a new video show. I'm starting with a buddy to talk about dirt track racing in the central U.S. So I need a machine that will work good for streaming a live show using Wirecast and editing video from the tracks using Premiere Pro. We've got 5 HD in-car systems with GPS, plus a couple HD video camcorders. I've looked at the PC per leaderboard, was looking at the high-end system components, and think they would be a good fit for us, but I'm not real sure on the GPU, since I will not be using this rig to play games. Is there a better card for my use? We don't have a huge budget. For our first year, we're doing the show, so if I can get by with a GPU under $500, that would be great. P.S. If there are any other things about the high-end system I should use instead of my use, please let me know. Your help is very much appreciated. Justin. So it's not just a streaming machine, it's a video editing machine. And one of the downsides of video editing is that you always want more processor, more memory, and more drive space. The flip side of that is I know people with thousands and literally like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 where they've got like a single board that's dedicated to accelerating a particular video application that costs them like $1,500. But I'm looking at the PC Pro leaderboard for the high-end system. Core i7 2600K, great start. ASRock Z68, great video card. One of the things to do is to take a close look at what's going on in terms of video acceleration for Premiere Pro, and I would say you can probably cut a little bit of money there, because you're not primarily relying on 3D, but you're looking at the CUDA core's ability to accelerate what's going on inside the application, and that varies a lot depending on what you're running inside of Premiere Pro. I would probably say 8 gigabytes is a good place to start for RAM, and then consider adding more later. The SSD is really nice, but you really need more hard drive space for editing. So maybe if you took some of the money away from the GPU and threw it at 2 or 3 or 4 gigabytes, terabytes, not gigabytes. Yeah, big difference there. I would almost say that I would almost want to say put in as much RAM as you can afford. And take a really serious look at getting like a couple of 3 terabyte drives in there, which is a tough thing to say given how expensive large hard drives are right now. But the one thing I run into, you're talking about having 5 HD cameras inside of cars. So what's going to happen is you're going to get the video out of the car at the end of the race. You're going to want to pull. You're either going to be looking at the video on the memory card that's in the camera, or you're going to be copying that to your system. And if it's something like a HD Hero, where it's a relatively small amount of space, right? They're storing on SD cards. You're talking about gigabytes of video, not terabytes of video. It's pretty manageable, especially if you kind of have the ability to start archiving that stuff off your production system. But I would take a really serious look at getting lots of big hard drives and, probably scaling back to figure out what the smallest SSD you can work on. It's tough because like the SSDs are great because they make everything so fast, but most of what you're going to be doing is maybe running in main system memory. Man.
Yeah, writing large files to the hard drive.
What would be nice would be like a $250 3 terabyte SSD. But you see, I don't have the time travel machine, so I can go into 3 years from now and bring that back for you.
Yeah.
What do you think, man? So
I agree with you. I mean, the storage, memory, and CPU are going to be the big buys right here, and the things that you should probably maximize with these applications. Even a mid-range graphics card is probably going to do perfectly fine. They'll still have plenty of CUDA cores in there to accelerate whatever Premiere Pro has. I know that for a long time, Ryan would just bring along some pretty hefty machines for doing video when we went to like QuakeCon, did shows like that. And anymore, you can do a lot of that on just stinking laptops. I think that they've got an i7 2600K that took over their dual Xeon board that I think it was a Skull Trail product that they used to do that on. And so, yeah, I mean, 2600K or 2700K is going to do great. Even hard drive prices are starting to go down. I saw Newegg today. You can get 2 terabyte drives for about $109. So we've seen a pretty significant drop as compared to seeing those same drives at $256 just a couple of months ago. So yeah, you're better off getting a lower end video card, something mid range, and the $200 to $300 level, and then taking that extra money for memory and hard drives, and just keep that that Intel Sandy Bridge based CPU for the main muscle for the machine.
Right. We got another question up here from Horse. He's got a question about his network storage bottleneck. He says, I'm going to be building an addition onto my home and running Cat 6 throughout. I want to build a home server that will store our family photos and RIP DVDs that we own. If multiple people will be accessing it at the same time, especially when it comes to streaming movies, where will the bottleneck be? The hard drives, the processor, the NIC? What would your solution be? Horse. Which has me envisioning sort of a horse playing basketball at the moment, playing horse. I'm really glad you're putting Cat 6 throughout your house. I run Ethernet to everywhere I can in terms of video playback, just because it eliminates network bandwidth. The problem, 802.11n is great, 802.11g is great. They start being not so great when you start streaming Blu-ray videos over the home network, especially if you're in an area where there's like 3,200 other people running very close to you on the same sort of, Wi-Fi space. DVDs are an incredibly small amount of data to be streaming. I'll be honest with you, unless you're like recycling an ancient Pentium machine, the processor's not going to be the hard drive. The processor's not going to be the bottleneck. The hard drives generally are not the bottleneck, especially if you're looking at fairly recent, even green 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte, 3 terabyte drives. The NIC could be the bottleneck. Normally, I'd say like your wireless router ends up being the bottleneck. But if you're not dealing with a wireless router, I think you're probably in good shape if you're building on a relatively recent Core i3 Athlon 2 Core 2 Duo machine. It also depends on how big your family is. If you have 6 teenagers and they're all going to be streaming, video in 6 different rooms simultaneously, that would be kind of a different. Issue. Are you guys running a server in your house, Josh?
I sort of do, but not really. But yeah, I think the main bottleneck would probably be just your network. Gigi is 125 megabytes per second of throughput, and when you consider that most streaming applications, I think Blu-ray is 2.5 megabytes per second or something like that. So you're not going to be running into, any kind of bottlenecks that unless of course you're serving out about 50 TVs in your home. So yeah, I think he's going to be perfectly fine there. with what he's got.
I mean, it's kind of funny because people are like, oh my goodness, most people are really happy with the video quality on Netflix, with the video quality on iTunes, with the video quality on the Hulu. And it's amazing to realize, right, that they've taken, in many cases, what would normally be 1080p content on a Blu-ray or over the air or, in a movie theater where you're looking at 18 to 30 megabits per second really easily. And when you squeeze that down, you can do phenomenal things, especially with MPEG-4. As long as you've got the ability to play it back, if you encode those DVDs in a really nice, super efficient codec like MPEG-4, you can take it from 20 megabytes per second or some megabits per second down to 2 megabits per second and still have an actually fantastic looking video, especially at 720p. Maybe 4 megabits per second if you're looking for something bigger. But because you're doing DVDs, you're basically looking at standard def video, so your files aren't going to be that huge. When you start buying Blu-rays, though, it'll be interesting to see if that starts creating problems. Blu-rays have a lot of data. Ibrahim has a question about M11X or waiting. Just a quick question, he says. Love your show. Thinking of buying the M11X, but I'm not sure whether I should just buy it now or wait for the 2012 version to hit stores. Since this is not an urgent buy, I can afford to wait a few months. Also, I'm on the fence between this one and the MacBook Pro at the lower end. Thoughts? Thanks a bunch. What do you think, Josh?
I think that he should wait. We've got Ivy Bridge coming. We've got new mobile graphics chips coming. Do not buy. I mean, if you're not in a rush, don't buy it. Wait until we see this next generation.
It's funny, you just basically, like Ryan and I say that all the time to people, where you're just like, if you wait 6 months, you're going to get more power for less money. But it also turns out that the Alienware M11X laptop is currently unavailable if you go up to Dell's Alienware website, which means to me that the little 11-inch gaming notebook that can is going through a refresh, probably for Ivy Bridge. So unless they've phased it out, and don't plan to replace it, which somehow I doubt. Alienware M11X. Oh, wait, no. Hold on. It's kind of funny. I love it when you pick one page and it's not available, and you pick another page and it is available. And, okay, so it is available. Apparently, I just managed to pick the one page on the Alienware website where the M11X was not available. Nonetheless, I'm with Josh. Wait. Too many exciting new parts coming out.
2 months. You're going to see all that you want to see. I hope.
You'll be very sad if you bought a notebook 2 months before that. So you mentioned you're benchmarking some graphics cards for PC-Per. Anything else you can talk about, or is PC-Per's current activities in secret mode while Ryan is off?
There's a couple of secret mode things that Ryan's working on, and I'd imagine you can guess what that would be. I think I've got at least one AMD processor that their new FX 6200 that promises to be a lot better value than some of the other Bulldozer parts. And as we know, Bulldozer is not a bad CPU. It just wasn't a great CPU, and it really didn't offer a whole lot more than their current lineup. And so this is one of the first really interesting parts. It's going to be a 3-module, 6-core running at 3.8 gigahertz base. And if you look at our previous high-end, was the 8150, which ran at 3.6 gigahertz base. So, I mean, we've got a couple extra, 100 megahertz faster when you're dealing with, lower thread type applications. And it's going to be a faster processor overall, I think, except when you get into those heavily threaded apps. So that's going to be kind of interesting to see how that shakes out as compared to some of the other older AMD products and what Intel has out now.
Nice. Texillas, we're keeping it pretty simple next week. First of all, I got to say I got schooled in a great email from one of the Texilla viewers. It talked about replacing a notebook screen, and the viewer in question disagrees with my summary of why you probably should not try to upgrade. In this case, it was, a 3-year-old $300 notebook that the screen had gone out. And I was like, let's not spend too much money on that. But the argument and the source actually of what usually kills a backlight, especially on an older CFL-based backlight notebook, is pretty interesting. If you want to get your hardware geek on, talk about repairing stuff on notebooks, check out TechZilla on Tuesday. That'll be a little bit of fun. And that's about it for this edition of Twitch. I'm Patrick Norton. We'll see you next week. Do us a favor. When you get a chance, email your hardware questions into Twitch, TWICH at twit.tv. We love hearing from you. And hopefully, actually, I can't say hopefully because I don't want Ryan's team to get knocked out of the March Madness, but hopefully Ryan will be back next week with his usual blend. We want to thank Josh for taking the time to join us today. Good stuff. PCPer.com is the website where you can find Josh and Ryan. And as always, you can find me at TechZilla.com. Thanks so much for listening to this edition of Twitch.